The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad we're back again today, and we have a great discussion to go back to. One of our guests, and actually the very only guest where we've had technical problems. So now we're going to embark on it again. Remember, this is the Bear Psychology Radio Show, where we are bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, health. And, I'm always very interested to hear what our authors and our guests have to share. But I'm also really interested in what our listeners share with us. That's always such a rich part of our conversation. So welcome again today. And today we are talking with Dr. Nina Josefowitz. She is a PhD and she comes with a lot of experience. She is a registered psychologist in Ontario, in the same province that I am practicing in, and she has focused her career on cognitive behavioral therapy. And I have to tell you, it's very interesting. She's written 2 books. They are both really well detailed and great workbooks that help the readers. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you have years of experience or you are taking a fresh look at what might help you if you're struggling with depression, or you're a clinician or a practitioner of some kind. Sometimes we need to go back to the basics. And I'm telling you, these 2 books are excellent, but I really like this new one, the Behavioral Activation Workbook for Depression, which just has a wonderful set of tools in it. And I think it lays a fantastic foundation for exactly what the book title is, helping you activate when you've been depressed. And, I think that it really opens up some nice new windows into how a person can work. So I want to thank you very much, Nina, for joining us again. And I wonder if we can just start with a little bit about you and what got you to write this book.
Well, thank you so much. And Anna, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here. So, a little bit about me. I am, as you said, a clinical psychologist. I'm basically a cognitive behavior therapist. I've taught at OISE. I've taught internationally in India, China, and Ethiopia, and all, given workshops all around North America. I've had a clinical practice. I've written. I'm one of these people who has loved her career and done a whole bunch of different things. So the question is, why write this book?
Mhm.
And for a couple of reasons. One is behavioral activation, and we'll talk more about what it is one of the most evidence-based form of therapy there is. It's been endorsed by psychological and psychiatric associations in Canada, in the US, in England, Australia, New Zealand. And I just want to make it available to people. I want to make it available to clients who are struggling with depression. And it's a standalone workbook that if you're someone who's struggling, you can pick it up, you can work through it. But I also want to make it available to clinicians who sort of thought, I'd really like to incorporate behavioral activation into my practice. I've taken a workshop, but I'm really not quite sure what it is. And you can work through this workbook with your clients. So that was my basic motivation.
Nice. I have to say you've been successful with this one, Nina, because it has a lot of little details that I think add a lot to an understanding that CBT is actually a lot simpler than people think, but it's a lot about taking the little steps that move people in that direction. And that brings me to, really what you got on the very front of your book, which is small steps can lead to big changes. And that's like it's in a circle, it's in an orange circle. And let's start with why you put that on the front of the book. What's that doing there? Small steps can lead to big changes.
Well, I think what it's about, Anna, is when you're depressed, the world is just feels like this huge, black, horrible cloud that you will never get out of. And people who are depressed, part of the illness or difficulties with depression, you have no energy.
Mhm.
So, people say to you, you should get going, you should do this, you should do that. And the leap is just too big. And people who've never been depressed, that's really hard to understand how exhausted you are, how demotivated you are. And one of the main issues in getting out of your depression and fighting back is taking very small steps and recognizing how important this is and what an accomplishment it is. Even if your family is saying, get back up to your normal life really quickly, please, you probably can't if you're depressed. Um,
Mhm.
so it's the small steps that matter.
Yeah, I understand that. We see that clinically, and I think it can be really humiliating to hear from the people that are closest to you, that exact thing. Just get up, get going, what's wrong with you, when really that's just not going to work right now. It's like, my insight into having recently really injured my knee. We were just talking about this a little while ago, and my big realization, because I've never had an injury like this, is that if I really wanted to heal, I had to take my time, which is not like me because, I tend to go fast on most things, to take my time and really let my body tell me what is available for me right now and then do it even though it was not easy to do. And I
Mhm.
think, this behavioral activation is a lot like that. Pay attention to what is available for you right now. But I mean, your book goes way beyond that in terms of how to actually get there, how to motivate yourself. In your introduction, you write that like a lot of the books on depression focus on thoughts and feelings, but this book really focuses on behavioral activation. So let's talk a little bit more about the the focus specifically on behavioral activation.
Definitely. And I love the way you started with talking with your knee, because I think the rehab model is a really great model for depression. So, why focus on behavior? If you're depressed, well, first of all, let me dial back a minute. When I say I'm a cognitive behavior therapist, what does that mean? Because the term is everywhere these days. What it means is you want to understand people's reaction by separating out what was the trigger situation And it could be something that happened. A friend said to you, I'm busy, I can't see you. It could be memory. You think back, you remember a traumatic event. It could be a feeling you have. You're starting to feel sad. And what you want to do is understand your reaction in terms of what were my feelings? What were my thoughts and images? What was my physical reaction? And what was my behavior? Because these four factors all interact. And the power of that is it means if you change one, you can change all of them. So that if you change your thoughts, you'll change how you feel. You know, if you're thinking, my friend didn't call me back, she doesn't like me anymore, you're going to get sad, you'll probably feel teary. And you'll probably, maybe eat a cookie or sort of curl up on your bed and, not call her back. If you change your thoughts to she's probably busy, it's easy for us to think, yeah, we would feel better. The issue is you can also change your behavior. And we have a lot more control over our behavior than we do over our thoughts. So that if you can engage, if you can face your problems, if you can start to become more active, your mood will improve, your thoughts will shift, and you'll feel physiologically more active.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I really like this idea of focusing on activation is because, for all of us, I mean, none of us are really all that different. We all have
Yeah.
moments in life that were awful or things that happen that have been very hard to get over or make sense of. And I look at it like the past has a tendency to pour into the present. So if we're always letting the past flavor or color this present moment, then even if our friend doesn't want to be friends anymore, it's like, okay, well, life happens. If we have certain kinds of rejection injuries from an earlier time, from a time when we were more vulnerable, then that injury, that slight, is going to feel extremely damaging because it hooks into the core of our being. But if our goal is behavioral activation, then maybe even if it's true that somebody doesn't want to be friends with us anymore, we still have this life that can be vibrant that we're creating for ourselves today, which is part of the reason that I really, really love your book and I love the approach that you take because it frees you up. Now I'm talking about to, our listeners and, the people that think about this stuff like us psychologists or mental health practitioners, we really start to think, why do people get stuck?
Yeah.
And it so often is that past pouring into the present, and this workbook gives people a hook that can pull you into a new place. So, really bravo for that because
If I can build on what you said, the
mhm,
idea of behavioral activation is that even if you had a really awful childhood or something really difficult happened to you, you have a horrible boss who fires you, the partner you thought was loving and devoted tells you they have been cheating for the past few years,
mhm.
you can still take a look at your present life and say, how can I build a good life for myself right now? And that's a very, very powerful question. And it's a question that says, let me take a look at the reality. Let me take a look at what my options is, and let me see what I can do for me so that I have a good life. And that's the essence of behavioral activation.
That's mastery when we start to allow ourselves to take those steps. And well, you've seen it as I have seen it as well. Sometimes people really struggle with that mastery. So I think sometimes just getting super concrete can be very helpful. And I mean, one of the charts that I really like in the book, and again, I'm just going to say this again for anybody who's listening. Remember, we now have about 6,000 live listeners, so that's a pretty nice group of people listening. I know that it's Thanksgiving and, maybe we won't have as many listeners today. At least that's what Gary says. But I want to invite our listeners to definitely send your emails, your thoughts, your experiences, your questions to uh, at studio101@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. It adds to the conversation. It's in studio101@gmail.com. So if you have questions or thoughts, please let us know so that you can be part of the conversation. But I'm going to say again, it's the Behavioral Activation Workbook for Depression by Nina Josefowitz and Stephen Swallow. And this one's really nice. So on page 8, you've got a really interesting chart. It's the figure 1.1, depression has a negative impact on behavior. And you start with feelings, sad, unmotivated, hopeless, tired, which lead to thoughts. Everything is too hard, nothing will get better, I don't matter. And then behavior, withdrawing from life and avoiding problems. And then you say, well, there's more to it than that. Because the part to be aware of is that then you start to withdraw from life and avoid problems and then become even more depressed. So
Right.
it's this terrible cycle. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how you kind of arrived at this?
Definitely. So what happens usually is clients come to your office, and what they're aware of is how, because of their depression, both feelings and their thoughts of the world is hopeless, I'm no good, they just don't want to do anything. What they're less aware of is that as they withdraw, their depression gets worse. And what happens with depression is you stop doing the things in life that give you a foundation of hope and wellness. And as you chip away at that foundation, you start to feel worse. But because you're thinking it's my feelings that lead to my not wanting to do anything, I should rest. I should listen to my feelings. Well, when you're not depressed, it's good to listen to your feelings. When you're depressed, the I want to avoid is the depression talking. And the more you avoid, the less you do, the more depressed you get. And then you're into a vicious cycle. You know, I like to think of life as a flower. And if you want a beautiful, bright flower, you need lots of beautiful, bright petals. And if you stop exercising, pluck a petal. You stop seeing friends, pluck a petal. You start getting late to work, so your colleagues are vaguely annoyed at you, pluck a petal. And very soon, your life, which was vibrant and lovely, is this kind of drab, not very attractive petal. And the job is to make your life a beautiful petal again.
You know, this conversation is making me think about a book that came out a number of years ago. It's called The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and
Yeah.
Jonathan Haidt. Oh, you know it. You're shaking your head.
Yeah, it's a great
book because
it's a great book.
one of the things that it does a great job at is recognizing that a lot of people have been left with a construct, a way of thinking that is actually very detrimental to your emotional, psychological well-being. And the main thing that, this concept, okay, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger in today's idea. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker, and you should always trust your feelings is one of the very negative belief structures that has gotten embedded into our world. So people start to really believe in a victim mythology where, the more of a victim they are, the more they can kind of rest and focus only on their victim positioning. And, they're going to secure that position of being a victim rather than recognizing that, hey, you are strong. You have embedded inside of you all the resources you need to grow and continue to kind of evolve in your life, no matter where you're at. It doesn't really matter whether you're 22 or 65. Like, it doesn't matter because we're supposed to continue growing throughout the life cycle. And, life has a lot to offer us at every stage of development, but we cannot lean into this kind of construct because it's so dangerous. This idea that what doesn't kill you makes you weaker, and you should always trust your feelings. You shouldn't always trust your feelings. And actually, you can get stronger instead of weaker. So,
I totally agree, but I want to make sure that our listeners are hearing is that Anna and I are not saying, we know you're depressed, but go out and conquer the world. What we're saying is, you're depressed. This is really, really hard. It's people who've had cancer and depression say, I pick cancer over depression. I mean, it's just depression is a really, really hard way to be. The way out is getting back to what we started talking about earlier, are very small steps. It's growing a flower. It's rehabbing a knee. It's starting to say, where am I now? Let me be kind to myself. And what is a small way that I could start to face the world? Who am I? What do I enjoy doing? What gives meaning to my life? And how could I do that a teeny bit more?
I
That
love
is
that.
so crucial.
Absolutely. You start where you're at and you lean into that and you figure out what is the next achievable step right now. But then you do it.
That's
You
and
let yourself do it.
And what I really tried to do in the book, and what I think behavioral activation is very strong at, is giving people a way to start assessing, where are they at right now? What's the reality, given that I'm depressed, of my current life? And providing people with a step-by-step guide out. Because, it's very easy to say, take some small steps out of your depression. Thank you very much. I would do that if I could. So I think we really need someone to take our hand, whether it's a therapist or a structured book, such as the Behavioral Activation Workbook for Depression, to really help you figure out what are the steps that I need to take to start to face my depression and start stepping out of it.
Yeah, you've got a really nice chart that actually addresses that on page 11, where you've got these my mood busting behaviors, and you've got this list where you identify the things that actually make you more likely to be depressed,
Yep.
and then kind of the examples from your life. It's like being able to do good investigative work on your own areas where you need to increase your activation. So if you're avoiding or decreasing your social contact, avoiding or decreasing activities that bring you enjoyment or pleasure, like you've got this beautiful list that looks at all of these things. And when we start to do the work of actually investigating ourselves, it's like we're freeing ourselves up to truly know ourselves and actually take the time, make the investment in kind of writing what has gone off track in our lives. So
Yep.
yeah.
No,
um,
it's a way of really saying exactly as you said. The formal assessment that we have in the book permits you to step back and to think, okay, what's going on with me? And where do I need to start making some small but systematic changes?
yeah. Now, in the book you do spend a lot of time encouraging the reader to identify and incorporate these mood boosting activities, things that
Yes.
really make a difference. But I mean, having done clinical work for as long as I have, that sometimes, there isn't even an idea that comes to the person's mind. It's just like, I'm blank. And even if I do come up with a list, I don't end up doing it. So
Mhm.
let's talk about those more difficult situations where the depression is so troublesome that it keeps anything from happening.
Well, first of all, one of the things that I think it's really helpful to do, and whether it's for a day or a week, is to really keep track hour by hour of your day. And we call it a daily activity schedule. because I've had so many clients come in and say, I am always depressed. Nothing ever changes. And then when we start to look at their day-by-day activities and their mood, they discover, I'm thinking of one gentleman I saw years ago, came in, always depressed. This is terrible. Turned out when his grandchildren visited over the weekend, his depression went from a 10 to a 7. Now, a 7 isn't great, but it's better than a 10. Or another woman I knew who had been an artist, again, always depressed, always depressed. When she looked at an art book, she had some art books that were just sort of hanging around her coffee table. Her depression went from sort of a 9 to, she said, probably an 8. So again, very small steps, but there is some shift. And I think that's very, very helpful to complete a daily activity schedule because it alerts you to the fact that there is some change in my mood, even if it doesn't feel like much, because you go from a 9 to an 8 and you're still depressed, but you're at an 8. And that's important. And what you can start to do then is how can I build on that? So if you take, for example, the gentleman with his grandchildren, well, his grandchildren could visit more often. But then we brainstormed, are there other ways you could contact them? Well, he decided he could phone them, which he wasn't doing. Or what was actually happening is his wife was phoning and he was saying, I'm too depressed to talk to them. So he didn't talk to them, right? Which gets back to what we were talking about, the avoidance and vicious cycle. So even though he was really depressed, he thought he could listen in on the conversation when his wife called. And, I don't know if any of you have grandchildren or even your own children. You hear the grandchildren say, Grandma, I went to school today and I did my Lego and it's a mood booster. Or even if they say fine, just hearing their little voice is nice. And so you start to build on the small things that give them pleasure. And it's very powerful.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I can see that happening in session, even with things that are very little, like, I ended up going out for a walk with my dog and, I saw the moon and it just changed my mood and, surprising, the tiniest little things, because not everybody has grandchildren, but,
Right.
we can all kind of go out and, see the sun or, possibly walk on the grass barefoot or, whatever it is. But, there's these interesting moments clinically where I also see clients who are severely depressed, but they too show these tiny little moments where a sense of joy peeks through because it is woven into our DNA, this joyful experience, right?
I
Um,
think what happens, Anna, is you tend to dismiss it. Because you're depressed at a 9, normally seeing your grandchildren walking outside in the brisk winter weather, seeing a girlfriend or a friend for lunch would be sort of, you'd really enjoy it and your happiness score would really go up. If you're depressed, it's sort of a little bit pleasant, right? And so you think this isn't working because
oh,
I've
yes.
only gone from a 9 to an 8 or a 9 to a 7, so it doesn't matter and you dismiss it.
That's such a good point that somehow if it's too small of a point change, so we have to be very aware of the subtle shift. And
Yes.
and that goes back to the very beginning of your book, this idea that small steps lead to big changes, like not to expect anything monumental, but look for the tiny little subtle changes that could make a big difference for the individual. And yeah, that's great. Nina, I have a question from one of our listeners. Is your book available at bookstores or just online?
I don't know. I think it is definitely available online at Amazon.com and Amazon.ca. And now I know well, at least in Canada, we don't have a postal service. I
Yeah.
know that Caversham in Toronto carries it. And if they don't, they can order it for you.
Yes. Yes. And the other thing is, these books, they do tend to come very quickly. And I know that, you probably have an ebook and, because
Yes,
it's through Harbinger, so they'll take care of a lot of those things, and
absolutely.
distribution would be probably
Actually,
very good.
Amazon is delivering. When I said because of our postal service, I mean, it's amazing. I don't know about you, but I'm getting my Amazon deliveries.
Yes, yes, I am as well. That's right. That makes it very, very easy. And the other thing that I like to do is, just in case you are wondering a little bit about what people are saying about the Behavioral Activation Workbook for depression, you can always go to goodreads.com and just type in the name of the book, and it'll come up, and you'll get an idea of what people are thinking and saying about the book as well. When I looked it up, it had some really positive reviews. So just so you know, Nina,
Thank
you get
you.
positive reviews. So
Thank
thank you for that question, Gail. So it is really an important thing for us to be aware that these incremental changes are part of the landscape. I also wanted to read this from Bob. Bob, thank you so much for your question. Bob is just asking, besides being sad, what are the triggers that show depression? Can you answer that, Nina?
Definitely. So, depression's diagnosed by a book called the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. And in it, it lists the criteria by which we diagnose depression. And some of the criteria are our mood. People are sad. They are often a lot of sense of guilt for things that they don't really have much control over, can be very strong feelings of regret. There are physiological symptoms that go with depression, being tired, total lack of energy, sleep disruptions. People tend to either have trouble getting to sleep, sleep too much, and when they do sleep, it's not refreshing. So, someone who's not depressed takes an afternoon nap and gets up and feels better. Someone who's depressed lies down, tosses and turns, get up, and is just as exhausted. Appetite changes. People tend to eat too much or not enough, and difficulties concentrating, very hard to focus. And then there's the avoidance. And if people are very, very depressed, they can feel suicidal. And I do want to say, if any of our listeners are so depressed that they are feeling suicidal, there are wonderful hotlines in Toronto. And Anna, do you have it over the top of your head? Is it 211 or
Yeah,
call?
we do have 211
We
here.
have 211
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
or 911. But those tend to be the symptoms of depression. Anna, did I miss any?
Uh, that would be a hard one for me to answer.
Okay, I just because when you're on
No, I mean,
radio,
the
you're sort of
reality is it's so complex, and there's so many layers to it. And the idea of kind of leaning into that. But I mean, this is actually a next step, which is this next email from Harry. Thank you for sending this in. Harry says, interesting guest today, Anna. Are there specific patterns of things that trigger depression? So these are the underlying factors, like loss of a job, developmental changes,
Mhm.
an injury or an illness, or the loss of somebody or something that was really important to you. So, for sure there are other ways of looking at how a depression gets triggered. So what are your thoughts about that, Nina?
Well, Anna, you and I tend to think very
You
similarly.
do.
We do. We absolutely do. So, what tends to trigger a depression are losses, exactly as Anna said. You've lost a job, you've lost a loved one, you've lost your capacity to be healthy. Sometimes it can be a symbol. So, for example, you lost a parent as a child, so you're very sensitive to loss, and a partner or a casual partner leaves you, and it may feel like a very major loss. What's important, though, with depression is it would be weird if you got fired or a partner left you or you discovered that you had an illness and you just said, "Oh, this is great. I'm so happy. I'm going to be positive." No one would believe you. You'll be sad. You'll feel, "I wish this hadn't happened." Totally normal to do some, and I know with you, if only I hadn't made that twist on my pickleball court, or
Right.
if only I'd done something different. But there's a difference between being sad, which is normal and human and expected, and being depressed. What depressed is about is a sense cognitively of things will never change, along with I'm no good, and the avoidance of activities that bring you pleasure, mastery, or a sense of meaning. So depression is a downward spiral, which is very different from normal sadness. Your partner leaves you, you kind of curl up in your bed. You call some good friends who take you out for dinner. You pat your dog, but you sort of re-engage slowly in life. When you're depressed, you spiral down into more and more withdrawal.
Yeah, it's like this story that you gave in your book, Ed, who's he's a 27-year-old skilled carpenter. He's married to Judy. They have a son, 3 years old, and he comes for treatment. And he's been off work for 2 years because he had an injury to his wrist. But it didn't just, it wasn't just like physio and trying to feel better. It's not like what you were just describing now. This just devastated his life, and he started to disengage from all the things that were really meaningful for him, and he needed to undergo some treatment in order for him to get back on track because he
Right.
was really destabilized in his life. And you had suggested using this changes in activities exercise with him where he could start to understand the things that he disengaged in and how that was really changing his life. Can you talk a little bit about that case?
I'd be delighted to. So what happened is Ed's a conglomerate of the cases that Steve and I have had. But what happens when you have a major life event, and it could be an injury at work, it could be an illness, it could be a very major loss so that a type of work is no longer possible, a relationship is no longer possible. You think I'm depressed because I lost my job. You are depressed. That is the trigger. But when you sit back and you take a look at your job, at your losses and how it's affected your daily life, you're no longer interacting with your child as much as you used to. You're no longer helping your partner with meal prep as much as you used to. You're not seeing your buddies at work the way you used to. You're not being active. And it's very hard, but it's very important to think about, given the change in my life that I can't change. Ed can't get his job back. A partner's left you, you can't get your partner back. You've been fired from work. Your boss is not going to call you and say, "So sorry, I made a major mistake." What behavioral activation does is it says, let's take a look at the areas of your life that brought you pleasure, mastery, and meaning. And let's see how together we can start to rebuild this slowly in a conscious way so that you go back to having a good life. And that's the essence of looking at it.
Um, I like that way of looking at it. I also think about, people who maybe can't connect anymore to the activities they used to do, maybe because of an illness or an injury, and they have to start to look at themselves through a new lens. Sometimes I'll use a pleasurable activities list, which I think you use as well.
Yes. Yep.
And it can uh, wake us up to things that maybe we didn't even consider before, even if it is as simple as doing a puzzle or trying something new that might give us a boost that we never really even anticipated. And I do like the idea that sometimes it's not what we think we have to achieve. It's the things that happen in our lives that we couldn't have even anticipated. But if we would only just let ourselves say yes.
Yep.
It can be just a willingness. We don't have to like it right away.
Yep.
We could just try it out. So, so that it can open that window for us.
You know what else can be very helpful? I love what you're saying with the pleasurable activities list, but also thinking back to when I was young, what did I enjoy? Because adulthood means you change.
Mhm.
So for example, when I was in high school, I took drawing classes. I was terrible. There was a general art class, but I took it was the art class, and I made a huge pink papier-mâché pig, which I adored making, and I have done no art since. But even as I talk about it, I remember how much fun it was. And I bet I would like to go back and make some clay or something with my hands. So going back to what did you enjoy as a child, but you've let go, can be important. I wanted to say one other thing, which I want to be sure I get in before our time's over, Anna, which is it's really important when you start thinking about activities you want to add to your life. Not only are they small and a small jump from where you are now, but you want to make sure that they're specific. So it's not get back into art, Nina, but it's, maybe think of going to the Y, see if they have a class that you could join, or buy some crayons and for 15 minutes, do some drawing. Specific, what are you going to do, when, for how long, and that it can be part of your routine. So it's not, I'm going to go see the Christmas parade. That's great. That's not going to sustain me next week, and that it feels doable. And I think that's really important. Specific, part of your routine, doable. And when I say doable, what's the first step? And can I do that first step? So for example, what it does is if the first step is get some crayons and just crayon for 15 minutes, see what it's like. I do that, it's a success. If the task is try some art, well, I only got out some crayons and crayon for 15 minutes. That's not very much. That's a failure. So
So it's not simply, oh, at some point in time I'd like to start running again. It's like
no,
I'm gonna go on Monday and I'm gonna walk for 5 minutes on the track and then I'm gonna run for a minute and I'm gonna do that for 15 minutes in total and then I'm gonna do it on Wednesday and Friday week after week. That's an actual
yeah,
plan.
that's a plan. And
Yeah,
the reality is, if you're thinking about even running for a minute, you probably ran, like I wouldn't even think of that, right? If I was depressed and I had to get active, it would be walking.
sure, for
Um,
sure.
But the fact that you even could say running means you probably at one point ran for more than a minute. So you got to be careful that you don't go, I can't believe it. I'm thinking I'm going to run for a minute. But if you're depressed, that's a big deal. And maybe you
It's a
have to
big deal.
start with walking.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where, the gentle approach comes in where we can say, look, you don't need to be punishing in order to be successful. So we need to start at that place. This is from Alexander, who says, "Hi, doctors. What is a clinical nugget?" You had mentioned that word at the beginning, I think.
Mhm. So a clinical nugget is a nugget is a little sort of, what's a nugget? It's like a little object of gold or a little object that's precious. So a clinical nugget is what would be a really precious or important piece of information to remember. And I think for behavioral activation and depression, it's anytime you can say yes to life, even if you don't feel like it, do it.
Yeah. I'm a really big fan of uh, maintaining our physical well-being as a road to emotional stability. And I know you reference that a little bit in your book, particularly, what happens in the brain and, the chemistry and why we need to actually let physical movement be part of our plan. Can you talk about why that's important, Nina? What happens there? Why people need to add that?
Absolutely. So when we're active, it's more and more clear that it actually changes our brain chemistry and it makes us more open to seeing positive things in life. Plus, it makes us feel physically better. And when we feel physically better, we're just happier. I know my little 7-year-old, I talked to him this morning, grandson, he said to me, he's been throwing up all night. So he said to me, I hate my life, Grandma. I hate
Oh,
my friends. I hate everything. Well,
oh dear.
yesterday he loved his life and he loved his friends and he wanted to go to his soccer game. When you feel physically sick, the world feels awful. And the more we exercise, the more we move, the better we feel. And, Anne, I'm really glad you asked me about physical activity because the other thing I wanted to be sure I talked about was the importance of social activity.
Mhm.
Because we tend to think, oh, if I'm depressed, you're usually lonely, and I want intimate, meaningful relationships. And absolutely, like, of course, we all want to be loved and we want intimate, wonderful relationships. There's a good chance if you're depressed that your intimate, supportive relationships may be under strain. There's incredibly interesting data that any form of social interaction will boost moods. And one of the studies I love is if you walk into Starbucks and you say, I want a cappuccino, and you look down, you give them your card and you walk out, your mood will be not so great. You walk in, you give the barista a smile, you say, I'd love a cappuccino. How is your day? They say, great. They're paid to say, great. They say, how is your day? And you say, fine. And you smile at each other. Your mood will be better when you walk out. You want to not just cultivate your intimate relationships. You want to cultivate everyday relationships. You want to cultivate relationships where you do something with someone. You're at work, smile at a colleague, say hello. You're picking your kid up from school, smile at the other parents. Anna, you and I have been smiling at each other. We're on Zoom. It's very nice.
It is, yes.
Um, don't just think of increasing social relationships as your intimate, meaningful relationships. Any human contact is good.
Yes, I agree. I had the sweetest little conversation. I go to this weight training class twice a week on Mondays and on Thursdays. And on Monday this past week, I had a very, very casual, just off the cuff conversation with a much, much older woman who was in my class. It was just, there was something about the sweetness of it. I don't know her, she doesn't know me, but she was just telling me what it takes for her. I don't know, I think she's in her late 80s to come to this very challenging class and just lift the 2-pound weights. That's where she's at. And I was just so delighted in the conversation, and I think she felt how delighted I was to hear what she was doing.
Yeah.
When she looked at me, she gave me this sweet smile, and that transmitted to me. And it was this kind of really sweet exchange. And I don't know her at all. It is exactly as you say. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could just be something very, very simple. The other thing that you've got in your book is reference to this Harvard study that followed 724 people from the time that they were teenagers in 1938. And the study found that having positive social relationships was the strongest predictor of health and happiness, But on the flip side, that we know that loneliness is closely related to depression. So, the motivation to figure out how to take those steps, even if it is a conversation with somebody who's helping you with your coffee this morning, that much makes a difference, and kind of getting clear about that is not a simple thing. We have a question from Mike, and I think it's worth thinking about: exercise or meds for depression?
Well, that's a controversial question. And
It
I'll tell
is.
you where I sort of come in on that. I think if you're very significantly depressed, meds can be very helpful. If you're not getting out of bed in the morning, if you've withdrawn from work, if things are just really, really exceptionally hard for you, absolutely, meds. There's also really good evidence that meds plus therapy is a really powerful antidepressive boost. If you're in the mild to moderate depression, the data is unclear as to how helpful meds are. I would certainly try either therapy or a self-help book without meds first, because the reality is all medication has some side effects. There are also people who have found medication extremely helpful. It often takes more than one trial. There are a number of different medications out there, but the data is clear. It's rare that medication alone is sufficient. So if you're on medication and you're getting a sort of, somewhat of a response, I would definitely try going through the program in the Behavioral Activation Workbook to see if combining the two gives you an extra boost. And I also think we're not really good at predicting who medication will help and who it won't, because I have lots of clients who are on medication, hugely helpful. I have lots of clients who've tried medication, made no difference.
Yes, I have seen that as well. Finding I like thinking about finding a multi-pronged approach.
Yes.
You talk about values in your
Mhm.
book. This is the final piece of the puzzle in the book that you've written. What are you talking about? What are these values, and, why do people need to think about their values in order to start feeling better?
Well, I think that's a really great question. What we know is that we talk about three types of activities that are the foundation to a good life. One are things that are pleasurable, doing things we enjoy. One are things that lead to mastery. And, it's as simple as cleaning your dishes to learning an instrument to being good at your job or feeling you're good as a parent. But the third is leading a meaningful life. That when we do things which are meaningful to us, it gives us a deep sense of contentment. And if you can connect your values to things that you enjoy, it gives you a real motivational boost. So, for example, I'm trying to get stronger and do more exercise. I sort of enjoy exercising. It's fun once I get there, but I do really value being healthy. And I especially value wanting to be strong enough so I can have fun with my grandchildren. Once I add that value to my exercise program, I'm so much more committed to it. Um, and I think it's really interesting. And I'd ask all your listeners to sit back and think about something you're doing that, is good for you, but you'd kind of like to do more of it or to start. Might be healthy eating, right? Why do you value healthy eating? What is it about it? Might be doing more exercise, socializing. For me, I forever want a neater desk. It's like I'm one of these people with a catastrophe of a desk. But whatever it is that you would like to start doing, think about, why is this important to me? What value does it embody? And see if that gives you an extra boost to engaging in it.
I have in front of me your list of values, just because it's so comprehensive. And you ask people to rate each value on a 5 point scale where 1 is not very important and 5 is very important. And it includes things like achievement, creativity, knowledge, good feelings, order and health, spirituality, social connections, personal strength, competence, integrity, enjoyment, independence, and then, space for others. And there are many, many under each of those broad headings. I just think it's a really good starting point for people to understand what values actually are and what values might be most important for you as an individual, because you then go to this really interesting figure, which is basically using value-based activities and effective mood boosting behavior. So the chart goes to boost my mood, and it's kind of one of 4 options: engage in a pleasurable mood boosting activity, increase physical activity and exercise, increase social connection, or engage in values-based activities. And then, supercharge, the first 3 by connecting to your values. And I just think that's kind of a good chart for anybody to think of if they're trying to look for motivation to feel like they can connect with the things that they really want to achieve in life, or help themselves elevate out of this depressed state. So
No, Anna, I think it's a really good thing to do, whether you're depressed or not, is
exactly.
to really sit back and think, what are my values? What's important to me? And then let's say I really value family. It's so easy to value family, but you don't really spend much quality time with your kids, or you're not seeing your parents that much. Or when you actually look at your life, you're not actually acting on your values. And to think, what do I really value? At the end, we're getting to the end of the year. At the end of the year, what do I want to look back and say, this is what I did this year? And then start to think again, got to the basic principles. What's a very small, specific, concrete, doable step that I could do? Is it I value spending quality time with my children? Once a week, we're going to do a 15-minute puzzle. Because I don't know what your listeners are like. I know when my kids were young, it was really easy to get into, drive them to school, make dinner, do the laundry. And then you turn around and you hadn't really played with them. So, what would be a very specific, small thing that you could do?
Yeah, otherwise you get into this kind of spin of activity rather than actually living life. Now, we only have a few minutes left, but I really want to do at least one of my 2 main goals before we finish. First, I want you to explain the Premack principle to our listeners, because I think it's really interesting, and I think it's worth at least illustrating. Maybe you can walk us through that.
Okay, I also love the Premack principle. What it is you take something you enjoy doing or you do regularly. I adore my cappuccino in the morning. I'm like a complete addict, right? And you only are going to get your cappuccino if you do one of your behavioral activation. So I've been using it right now because I'm 2 months out of a hip replacement. There's all this physio I'm supposed to do, and frankly, I don't want to do it. I don't get my cappuccino in the morning unless I've done my physio. So what is it that you want to do? Is there a television or a Netflix program you want to watch? You have to go for your walk. What is the behavioral activation that you're having trouble getting motivated to do? Because when you're depressed, behavioral activation, it's hard. It's really hard to get active. So how do you reward yourself? What are you only going to do if this activity is done? And that's the essence of the Premack principle.
I love it. It's like booster juice. It's just fantastic. It gets you going. So I want to thank you very much, Nina, for joining us. We have 1 minute, and I'm going to go through this really quickly. Using hump. Tell yourself the truth about your negative thoughts and feelings. This is from your book. I think people should read it. This is fantastic. They're harmless. they're useless, they're meaningless, like your thoughts are not truths and feelings are not facts, and they're passing. Any final words you'd like to share with our listeners today, Nina? And thank you so much for joining us. I hope we'll have you back on again sometime.
Well, thank you very much. I think my final thought would be, no matter how down you are, and even if you're not down, think about what is a really small, specific activity I could add to my life today that might boost my mood. Whether you're depressed or not, we can all use mood boosters. 15-minute walk, a hug with a partner, a big smile when you pick your kid up from school, something really small, and notice what it does to your mood.
Beautiful. Thank you so much,
Thank
Nina.
you.
And I hope people will pick up this really helpful book, The Behavioral Activation Workbook for Depression by Dr. Nina Josefowitz. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your Thanksgiving. Be well, and I will look forward to having another conversation with you next month. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Anna, and bye to everyone who's listening. Lovely to have been here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.